phrasing that like, I want us to strike Iran. But we had a lot of mixed signals. We were going to strike. We were sending assets there. Then we didn't strike. Trump says, oh, it's because, he gives his reason. Netanyahu says, oh, we talked him out of it. What do you think the reason is that the U.S. chickened out and is not striking Iran, or do you think we are about to strike Iran?
We'll be very careful of using that term chicken out. I'm told that if you mention taco, Trump always chickens out on the White House, that you'll be shot on sight. Trump will not tolerate that. I think there's a lot of confusion and, frankly, disinformation. What I think you're seeing is another manifestation of the absence of any real strategic planning, thinking, preparation before execution. Everything is impulse driven. It's whatever Donald Trump wakes up and decides he wants to do. His cabinet scurries around and tries to respond to it. Now, in reality, what happened? I think that we thought we had an opportunity inside Iran to really disrupt the regime, even bring it down. This, of course, was based on the protests that are really a consequence of a terrible economic situation and the dramatic reduction in value of the rial, the Iranian currency. Now, a lot of us have wondered why Iran has not gone to BRICS or to the Chinese or someone and said, look, lend me $1 billion, because they could do that easily. That would boost the economy and help the situation tremendously. But for some reason, they haven't done that. Now, I know there's Islamic law that essentially forbids usury. This is one of the reasons the banks in the Islamic world tend to be very solid as opposed to ours. I don't know if that's the justification for it, but the bottom line is that what you started with were very legitimate protests about the economic conditions in Iran. Those overlapped with a struggle, political struggle, between reformers and conservatives. This then was developed into a CIA, Mossad, MI6 operation with the introduction of thousands of these Starlight terminals, enormous quantities of money, which in that setting, of course, is going to buy a certain amount of support. And now we have all sorts of evidence that's being provided overseas as well as here at home for instructions given to people in the crowds to fire on the police and provoke the police to shoot back at them in the hopes that people would be killed. And this then would worsen the situation. Well, all of this unfolded, and it failed. It failed for a whole variety of reasons. The failure began, I would argue, last week on Friday when the Iranians and the Turks cooperated to annihilate 400 Kurdish fighters who were trying to move from Syria into Iran. Mm-hmm. I don't think the Mossad or the CIA anticipated that, but I think that's a very important development. There's a growing appreciation in Turkey for the criticality of stability and unity in Iran. The two states, for different reasons, have been competitors and sometimes enemies over 1,000 years, but both are civilizational states. We need to understand that. Americans don't have any idea what that means. Iran is Persia. The Persian Empire has been with us for 2,500, 2,600 years. They have a unique civilization and culture. So did the Turks, for very similar reasons. The Turks came out of Central Asia. They're not Arabs. Anyway, the point is that both of these states are not going to help us or the Israelis destroy one or the other, because they see their survival as civilizational states at risk. So what's happened is that the Starlight terminals were largely picked up, confiscated. The Chinese assisted technically helping to suppress and jam these things and the satellite connections. I think the Russians have helped in whatever way they could, but the point is, I think President Trump was told that this was a golden moment in time, which would allow him with very little effort to topple the government. That failed miserably. Secondly, once it became clear that failed, I can't prove this, but I suspect the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Kane, probably told him, if we're going to do this, we're going to need more firepower, because what we anticipated has not happened. In other words, the country is not imploding. Its armed forces are intact. Its integrated air and missile defenses are intact, and so forth. And I think at that point, stories were spun out to explain why now suddenly the attack was off. And remember, President Trump tried to persuade people, well, they've stopped killing, and I told them I didn't want them to kill. Give us a break. There's no evidence that Trump gives a damn about who lives or dies in the Middle East, least of all Iran. Mm-hmm. So I think that's just nonsense. And I think they had a Pakistani diplomat insists in his discussions with the Iranians that they told him that they informed Trump that they were scaling back on the killing. Now, maybe that was true, but I don't think it's killing in the sense of what you saw in the riots. I think it's really executions of fifth columnists, people that betrayed their country and sold out principally to Mossad, because you had, according to Mr. Pompeo, lots of Mossad agents out in the audience. Well, gosh, what a shock.
Right.
So I think they probably told, it could be that President Putin, because supposedly the Russians have had their hand in advising them, said, listen, scale back on these executions for the moment.
Yeah.
Even though we tolerate these kinds of executions in Saudi Arabia and any other places all the time, and Trump never expressed any concern about the loss of life in Gaza. So who knows? But I think the show is on. You have to look at the Lincoln Carrier Battle Group. It's still on its way to the region. We may see a second show up. I wouldn't be surprised. So I think the war is definitely on the agenda. And I don't see any evidence that Mr. Netanyahu is relenting. This is his golden moment. Either he acts and gets the full support, unconditional support of the United States Armed Forces and wins his war in his mind, or he loses.
Yeah. There was an odd earthquake in Israel yesterday. I don't know if you heard about this, a very short, odd earthquake that people are reporting happened right at where Israel would potentially be keeping nuclear weapons, that perhaps they were doing a test. They'd also had reportedly said that there was going to be an earthquake drill at the very moment that that it actually happened. Like they could predict, they knew when this earthquake was coming, which we don't have that kind of technology at this point to know when earthquakes are coming unless you're causing the earthquake. So do you think that Israel is preparing to go nuclear against Iran?
Well, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that could have been an underground nuclear test in the vicinity of Dimona, which is the region you're talking about. But we don't know. And you're not going to get the truth out of the United States government, which is essentially in the grip of Mr. Netanyahu and his billionaire donors in the United States. So I don't think we're going to find out the truth on that subject. Just keep in mind from the very beginning, and I'm not the Lone Ranger, I've said this several times, there is always a danger that if things go south for the Israelis, that they will turn to a nuclear weapon.
Yeah.
We estimate they have between 250 and 300 nuclear warheads, potentially. I don't know how many launchers. Some of these are on submarines. They have several Dolphin-class submarines the Germans gifted to them that were modified to carry cruise missiles with nuclear warheads. They can also deliver these from missiles on the ground. They can deliver them from F-15s to F-35s. So they have that capacity. And, this is something that the Turks have addressed, actually, obliquely. Even Mr. Erdogan publicly said, we know what you have, and we're not afraid. Well, the reason he's not afraid is that for years, and we're going back 30 years, the Pakistanis have promised the Turks a nuclear weapon if they need it. That's always been available to the Turks. And obviously, what a catastrophe that would be for the Middle East if the Israelis were arrogant and stupid enough to use a nuclear weapon. Then I think we would see nuclear weapons spring up all over the place, and that would be the end of Israel. So I hope that's not going to happen. But I don't see any evidence. Maybe you do, Kim. I don't see any evidence that we have any real influence over Israel. I see a lot of evidence that Israel has huge influence over us.
Yeah. And I think they are crazy enough to use a nuke. I mean, I don't put that outside of the realm of possibility. Their behavior has shown that they don't value human life to the level that one would expect of a Western democracy that they claim to be. But Iran, reportedly, there's also a bunch of hypersonic missiles pointed at Israel right now from Iran. And what's Israel's defense? I mean, Israel's a tiny country. Iran's massive. They saw what happened to them this past summer, spring. So I would think that they would be gearing up with a nuclear weapon, and I don't put it past them to use it. The question is then, what would Iran do? I mean, the thinking for America is, well, the nuclear weapons we dropped on Japan, that ended the war. That was it. So Israel would think, okay, we dropped the nuke and that'll end the war. That'll be it. But I don't know if that would be it.
No, I don't. I don't think so. Which is the rationale for the comments I made to you earlier. Remember that Iran consists of a population of over 90 million. The country itself is the size of Western Europe. You have the Turks who are not far behind them. And I think that the use of a nuclear weapon could precipitate the opposite of what the Israelis think it might produce.
Right.
Of course, they may then assume that we will employ our nuclear weapons that we have at sea in support of them. I hope not, because if that were even possible, that would very definitely bring in the Russians and the Iranians. Remember that the Iranians buy roughly 30% of their oil from Iran. It comes through the Persian Gulf.
The Chinese, you mean?
Chinese, yeah.
Yeah.
And then the Russians are very, very concerned about their southern flank because of Central Asia. They want a stable partner in Iran. Iran, if it were to become destabilized or worse yet, divided or fragmented into smaller states, could prove to be an enormous problem for the Russians. They want good relations because they also want Iran to be part of BRICS and this thing we call the One Belt, One Road project. And we've already seen trains arrive from China in Iran carrying various goods. So Iran is a critical member of the what I would call the China, Russia, India, Iranian quadrangle, if you will. All of these states are linked in one way or another. So we're looking at a real potential in the region for Armageddon, which I suppose there are some deranged people that welcome that on the belief of that some has some sort of religious payoff, but for the rest of us, it's insane.
Right.
And we should try and stop it to the extent that we can. But here's the problem: as I was reviewing this man Witkoff, the real estate guru or whatever that is friends with Trump, who runs around with Kushner making deals and pocketing huge quantities of money, at the same time theoretically representing us. And he communicated these demands to Iran. He said, stop enriching uranium, reduce missile stockpiles, reduce approximately 2,000 kilograms of enriched uranium material to 60%, and stop supporting, quote unquote, regional proxies. That means anybody that Israel doesn't like.
Right.
In return, we'll lift sanctions. Well, that's just, it's they can't comply with that. You might as well say the same thing to the Russians. We keep making demands of the Russians, now making demands of Iran that they won't meet because they're sovereign states. And the more that you threaten, the more persuaded they are that they desperately need to build up their military capacity. So it looks like a dead end. And I think we're going to see this war break out probably in 7 to 10 days.
How does it end? I mean, when it comes to regime change, for example, I don't know why they ever thought there's only one way. I mean, we've been doing all of these various tactics to try to get the people inside of countries to turn on their leadership, right? We've sanctioned Cuba for how long, kept them poor for how long, did the same thing to Venezuela. They saw 130,000% increase in inflation. It didn't work. It didn't oust Maduro. There's really only one way for regime change to happen, and that is the military's got to turn on you. And that has historically been the case over and over and over again. When you lose the military, that's when you lose your power. It all comes down to military. So it doesn't look like the Iranian regime, the Iranian military is turning against the Iranian government anytime soon. I mean, maybe, and that would be the only way I could see change actually happening. Otherwise, you just end up in an all-out war, a bloody war, and then I don't know exactly how does that one end. We're not going to go and conquer Iran, are we? I mean, what would be the end game of that war? How would it end?
Israel is in a win or lose everything situation. So if Israel embarks on this war with Iran, the leadership of Iran, the state of Iran must be destroyed. If it's not destroyed, Israel will be destroyed. I mean, this is the view from Netanyahu and the people that support him. So this is a one-way ticket to Armageddon. So, whatever happens, unless miraculously, as you point out, everything changes, which I don't expect to happen in Iran, this will end up being the destruction of Israel. Now, here we are, and we have pledged our life, treasure, blood, everything to defend Israel to the bitter end. Well, what does that mean? How far are we willing to go?
Right.
Are we willing to engage in a nuclear exchange on behalf of Israel? Well, right now, I would say President Trump would do whatever he's told by Netanyahu and his donors. I just read the other day something about Ron Lauder, this billionaire whose mother or grandmother, I guess, was thrown out of Vienna, Austria, back when the Nazis took over, and she had a perfume business. She came to the United States and made it into $1 billion perfume industry. Supposedly, he is the one who planted the idea of annexing Greenland with the president. So we know who the president listens to. He listens to his billionaire friends and buddies, who all happen to be Zionists. Mm-hmm. So my great concern is that instead of acting like the president of the United States, he'll act like the president of Israel. And that means that he'll rush to the defense of Israel come hell or high water. I mean, isn't that why Mark Levin calls President Trump the first Jewish president of the United States?
I just don't know how this ends. I mean, that's just the real question. Do you think we're going to end up sending American boots and putting them on the ground in Iran?
No. The country's too big. There are too many people involved. We couldn't control Afghanistan if our lives depended upon it. Mm-hmm. We couldn't control Vietnam, really. Unless you're willing to go in and essentially behave like Genghis Khan and kill 40 or 50,000 people to make your point, which, thank God, we have not been willing to do, mm-hmm. Then I don't see much hope. I mean, in Algeria, where the French had enormous success against an insurgency, they always admitted that as soon as you pulled the troops out of the area, you lost control again. So I don't see any future for that. All I see is the potential for enormous destruction of life and property. The other thing is that we should not discount the readiness of the Russians or the Chinese to become involved in this.
Yeah.
And I think we do. And I think President Putin has tried very hard to make it clear, don't do this. Don't engage in this war against Iran. And I think we've said, oh, well, it doesn't matter. Listen to General Keane, who probably is one of Trump's senior military advisors for all intents and purposes. And what does he say? Oh, Putin's bluffing. The Ukrainians are winning. Millions of Russians are dying. The economy's broken. Don't worry. That hasn't worked out very well. No. But I think he still is singing the tune that the president is hearing in his ear.
Well, Colonel Douglas Macgregor, thank you so much for being here and giving us your insight into this. It's a scary time for sure. Again, I just don't know how what they think the outcome, what a positive winning outcome is for them. If they think they could go in and somehow control Iran, take down the government, and then what? Are we gonna break it up into pieces? And
remember that we would like to have control of the oil.
Right. Well, of course. Right.
Well, yeah, but that extends the life of the petrodollar. The petrodollar is in a lot of trouble.
Right.
Without petrodollar, you cannot borrow in perpetuity. We want to continue to borrow in perpetuity. So there are a lot of other things going on. That's why the Iranians know exactly what the game is. And we think we're going to have a win in Venezuela. Now we're going to send private contractors down there to protect the oil drilling rigs from being attacked by the locals.
Yeah.
Good luck with that. I mean, you know what private contractors end up doing? They're mercenaries. Mm-hmm. That is a recipe for corruption on a scale that we don't even want to think about. It looks like the 30s, go in and rescue international fruit, send in the Marines or something.
Yeah.
I don't think that's going to work very well in Venezuela. I think all of this is going to come apart. In the meantime, just turn on the returns from the various bond markets, listen to the economic analysts, and they all tell you we're headed into bubble bursting territory.
Yeah.
Which bubble do you want to go first? Commercial real estate, private real estate? I mean, we could spend all kinds of time. So one of the things that could get in the way of everything that President Trump wants to do is fiscal reality. That may save us.
Right.
Hell of a thought.
Well, tell us about the national conversation so people can actually hang out with you. Is that what this is? They could actually join you face to face?
Well, we started in Dallas on the 4th of October last year, and we had a good session. It was limited to numbers of people, but the idea was that we wanted every 3 or 4 months to go somewhere new in the country, all across the country, and hold sessions with 400, 500, 600 people. And we would bring in some, subject matter experts, answer questions, but then the audience can directly address any of the subject matter experts, not just me, and say, well, listen, I don't agree with that. This is what I think. So we wanted this forum because we really want to know what Americans think.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think most of the time we do.
Mm-hmm.
Or we look at polling data, but you don't get a chance to look at the polling questions. You have no control over who shows up and who says anything. So that's part of it. And it's a good alternative to what John Belushi used to talk about in Animal House. When things get bad, what was John Belushi's solution? Drink heavily. Come to the next event that we are having. We're putting together 3 more cities. We'll have that out soon. And don't drink heavily. Come and show up and express your views. Gulf, they would not underwrite any shipping because they're not going to put themselves at risk of total bankruptcy in a war zone. So that needs to be understood. That's why the whole notion of mining the strait or putting in barriers and so forth, that was never necessary. The Iranians understood that. Now, as far as the free flow of trade is concerned, that's going to resume. In fact, some people would argue it's begun to resume. Unfortunately, not at the pre-war levels, although that eventually over many months can change. But the Iranians are simply saying if you are U.S. or Israeli flagged ships, if you are in league with them, if you're supporting them, then we're not going to let you go through the strait. It's very simple. Everybody else is being pretty much told you can do it, but you have to buy your oil in yuan. Now, if he's going to go ahead and destroy the Iranian infrastructure for the oil system, if you will, the energy system, and the desalination plants, then I think that pretty much puts to bed any chance whatsoever for the Gulf to recover over many, many, many years. It's just not going to happen. So these are foolish observations or statements from someone who doesn't really understand what's going on. Secondly, the British and the French, I think, at some point are going to tell us to stuff it where the sun doesn't shine. Harold Macmillan, whom I regarded as a very good British prime minister, had the foresight and the wisdom to keep Britain out of Vietnam. We went to Harold Macmillan and said, we want you to join us in Vietnam. I said, forget it. That has nothing to do with NATO. NATO was always formed as a defensive alliance to defend and protect the people of Europe from communism. That's what it was about. We've been trying to instrumentalize the alliance as a set of vassal states who, on demand from Washington, provide troops for whatever we want them to do. I mean, this is sort of like the Roman Empire. It's ridiculous. It's the kind of thing Napoleon Bonaparte did to the countries that he controlled. And so he would have tens of thousands of Germans and Poles and others fighting for France. This is ridiculous. This is 21st century. That's not going to happen. They're not going to participate. They have no incentive to do so. And this sort of diplomacy by X is catastrophic. You end up offending people unnecessarily and you make yourself look ridiculous. And I think, these opening statements about the Strait of Hormuz demonstrate he doesn't really understand what he's dealing with. I keep telling people, what did we do after 8 years in Vietnam? We left. It took another 2 years after we left for the regime to completely fall apart under assault from the north. But the point is, we had no good ideas. We had no solutions. We squandered American blood and treasure stupidly. There was never an attainable objective. And as a result, we looked ridiculous. But it was, for various reasons, not taken as evidence for our weakness and stupidity. And of course, we did recover from it. Now, what we're doing at the moment is we're beginning to look feckless because we have thrown everything that we possibly can, short of a nuclear weapon, against the Iranians, and it hasn't worked. So if you're sitting anywhere in the world, whether it's Brazil or China or Russia or anywhere else, you're looking at this and saying, oh, this is interesting. Clearly, we can defend ourselves against this. It's not as bad as we thought. So I think we're beginning to look weak, which is what happened to the British after the Boer War. It's not a good thing for us at all. But again, I don't know that President Trump is thinking in those terms. If he's just watching videos that show explosions and things burning without understanding the larger strategic implications, I don't see anything good happening in the short run. But over the long run, if he goes ahead and does what I think he's going to do, we won't accomplish our objectives at all. It'll get worse, and we'll just leave. 58,000 men killed, almost twice the number of Americans in uniform killed that were lost in the Marine Corps in the Pacific. Now, this is a different world today. We spend a lot more money on individual bombers, billions of dollars, and we can't afford to put these bombers at risk. So we've got to be careful where we position them and how we use them. So I think there are constraints on our ability to fully exploit high altitude bombing. They're not profound yet, but they're headed in that direction. I think we have to understand something else. President Trump said this war is going to end whenever he wants it to end. And I think he's telling you by implication that when he decides it's enough, he's going to pull out and leave. And I think the consequences strategically will be extremely negative. We will be finished in the Middle East. I think we're finished there now, frankly. All of these Sykes-Picot states left over from the Versailles Treaty in 1919 are going to vanish. I think there are going to be internal revolutions in the Arab world to deal with these, well, let's put it this way, the Epstein class in the Arab world that rules them. And ultimately, I think we're going to go in, but it's going to be very tough for the reasons that you outlined. Naval forces, and for that matter, ground forces or air forces, all have had to move a great distance away from where they want to go. And sometimes I have to remind people, when we landed at Normandy, we landed several hundred miles from the German border. If we had tried to land on the German coast, the whole thing would have been destroyed instantly. And by the time we got there in June of 1944, 82% of the German armed forces were on the Eastern Front, and we weren't really facing a very significant opposing force. The Germans were able to put 2 planes in the air against 5,000 of our fighters. So we're in a different position here. This is an enemy that is winning the missile war. This is the enemy that has built missile dominance. And we've had a hell of a time with it, and I don't think we can change it. We'll see. But my fear is it will go in again, do pretty much what we did the first time around, and simultaneously try to move Marines and airborne infantry, Rangers, special forces, infiltrate these forces into the region. And again, the problem I have with infiltrating, can it be done? Perhaps. But once they're in there and you want to get them out, how do you get them out? Once they're in there, how do you feed them? How do you clothe them? How do you get them water? All of these problems. So, you're presenting the right picture for everybody strategically, what a challenge this is. And I'm sure that President Trump is being told these things, but I think we're desperate. And I think our desperation will overwhelm our common sense, and we'll